Friday, 30th August, 1861. I finally saw our army's new commander. Little Mac, as we call him, has a somewhat less than imposing figure. Standing several inches shorter than many men around him, and meticulously groomed in the midst of our filth and squalor, he carries himself with an air of arrogance worthy of a young Napoleon. He is something of a mystery to me. At times he looks at us at a slant, and with half-closed eyes, as though full view of us would degrade him. But at other moments he tells us he loves us, and I'm not sure I don't entirely believe him. In any event, I get the impression he is one of those for whom good fortune is of his own design, while ill happenings are the fault of someone else. Yet it is his military prowess that is to whip us into shape, and I have already witnessed the efficacy of his attempt. Our men seem a bit more disciplined, though of course they are loath to give up such frivolities as gambling and drinking when the paymaster comes around. I've just received a letter from Caroline, dated March 15th. How she got it past the lines, or how many hands have touched it before mine, I don't know. She says Will joined an Alabama cavalry regiment by lying about his age. I pray to God I do not meet him in battle, but I fear I already have. I saw a figure of remarkable likeness fall from his horse in the skirmish near Stillwater, possibly hit by none other than my bullet. How I wish this bloody business were over, that I might see the old folks again and know my brother's fate. Yet after the hateful parting with father and Will, how can they take me back? I shall start a letter home today, though I know how improbable the chances are of it reaching its destination with any amount of speed. I will beg father's forgiveness for my angry words, and any pain I have given him. I have seen what war is. Knowing my time may be short, I cannot bear the thought of going to my grave with this enmity between us. The house was blissfully silent in comparison to the din of earlier in the night. Teague sat on the front porch, looking out at the lanterns crossing each other's paths as they moved through the meadow across the road. He could hear the occasional muted yell of excited children, or a chuckle from one of the old folks in the parlor who had opted to miss the fireworks. A firefly lit on the railing near him, just out of the lamplight from the window. He watched it blink to its companions in the yard, and then fly off to join them. He stared into the darkness, trying to anticipate where the next tiny green flash would show, until a much brighter flash of red sparks burst in the distance and faded into starlight. He winced as the sound of the exploding shell carried to his ears. Not artillery, he repeated to himself. This is the last of the pie. Teague looked up to where Anna Lee stood holding a saucer of blackberry pie. Please eat it. I sacrificed a dress to get these berries. Teague smiled and took the pie, then started slightly at another explosion. I would have thought you'd be watching the show. Annalie shrugged as she sat beside him. I can see it from here. How is your sister? All right, all things considered. She looked over at Teague when his silence said he didn't believe her. God'll handle it. Teague forced a smile, but then thought of Annalie's own forced smile from earlier in the night. I apologize for what happened in the parlor tonight. It's no more your fault that you can sing than it is mine that I can't. Another skyrocket was shot off, and Teague jumped again. He could feel Annalie's gaze on him, but kept his own on the fireflies. Do you think they came through all right yesterday? Annalie asked after a moment. The army, I mean. I don't. You can read in the newspaper next week some of what they did, but I can tell you it's always worse than they write it. Tell me. Teague didn't look at her. No. At least tell me what the camps were like. Teague turned to her. I want to know what it was like where my brother died. Washington? Annalie nodded. Please don't spare me. It's filthy. You don't want to know. I don't care. Teague set the saucer of half-eaten pie on the floorboards beside his chair and leaned his head back against the house. Well, I never bivouacked long in Washington, but I can tell you how it was in the field. He paused. For one thing, you'll never see so many men together in your life, and all manner of men. In our regiment alone there were a dozen storekeepers, 3 carpenters, lawyers, bakers, tanners, newspaper men, a couple of town drunks, about a couple hundred farmers. Teague closed his eyes. And a professor of English literature, Latin, and the senior Shakespeare class. He sighed. And 100 college boys. Annalee bowed her head while Teague continued. And for each one of those men, there were any number of crawling things, lice and fleas and such. We couldn't get 'em out of our clothes or off our bodies for more than a few hours, no matter how often we washed. Teague grimaced and rubbed his arm. Dysentery, typhus, yellow fever, measles. We were all so close together, you see, breathing each other's air. And whoever wasn't sick when we went to battle, well, they were likely in for a bullet. He stopped to glare at the thunderous blue plume in the sky. Or a shell. You lost many dear friends, Annalee said. Teague didn't answer. He looked down at his hand on the chair arm, where Annalee put both her hands on top of it. I know you're in a great deal of pain, and I wish there was some way for me to take it away. Teague looked up at her face. But I can't. She stared at him. I want so much for you to feel better. Please, talk to God. She leaned forward for a better view of Teague's face as he turned it away. Tell him what you told me, and what you wouldn't tell me. Teague reached for his crutches. Well, as we're not on speaking terms, perhaps you can tell him for me. He stood and went off the porch into the darkness. He could imagine her face. She might have closed her eyes and looked down, or she might have gotten as red-faced as he was. He didn't care. But he didn't expect her to call after him. I will!